everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Bold Leaders in Learning. I'm your host, Brandon Busteed, Chief Partnership Officer and Global Head of Learn Work Innovation at Kaplan. And I'm excited to have one of my good longtime friends who I typically see out on the circuit at conferences, on panels, doing keynotes that butt up against one another. We haven't seen each other, obviously, in that fashion for a good 16 months. So I was missing the wisdom of Bridget Burns and invited her on the show today. We've been doing dueling weekly shows all year, thanks to the fact that we haven't been on airplanes and actually have regular schedules. But in any event, Bridget is the executive director of the University Innovation Alliance, has been doing some phenomenal work with that. And Bridget, first, thanks for joining me. Would love to have you tell people a little bit more about your own background and then about the work that the University Innovation Alliance is doing.
Well, I'm so honored to be here and to join you on your show. So this is very exciting for me. And I work with the University Innovation Alliance, which I'm branded as much as I possibly can. And it's a group of 11 large public research universities who are working together to share ideas, scale them up, and to hopefully transform themselves around student success. But my background is I actually am kind of exhibit A of the kinds of students that we try and serve. I grew up in a low-income family in rural Montana, had a really difficult time navigating higher education because I, like many students, assumed that someone would be watching if they knew I was from that background. And I expected they would be guiding me along the way. And I had terrible advice growing up and all of the things that you see for low-income first gen and students of color. And managed to white knuckle my way through and barely eked out with my degree in 7 years. So as a result, I feel deeply passionate about helping to make higher ed easier for students to navigate and a better experience so that more of them can get what I think has been an incredible opportunity for me. So I'm hoping that's the answer you're looking for.
Well, it certainly relates to the mission of the Innovation Alliance. So tell us a little bit more about the work that you've kicked off. I mean, as you mentioned, 11 large, public universities, and with a, very clear mission and a lot of collaboration. So just tell us a little bit more about how it got underway, right? How did this group come about? And a little bit about some of the major initiatives and kind of mission and purpose that it has been aimed at.
Well, so the Alliance was formed by 11 university presidents and chancellors, and they came together because they saw a really big problem facing the future of our country, which is around our economic competitiveness. We weren't producing enough graduates to meet the economic demand. Now, obviously, in COVID, they've shifted even more dramatically. But even those students that we do graduate, what we saw is a tremendous disparity between low-income students and high-income students, right? Like It was, students were 8 times more likely to get a college degree. And if you play that out over time, that has real challenges for the future of our democracy, for all kinds of things. So this group of presidents decided to team up and try and figure out how could we actually team up together to set some goals to try and actually it was somewhat, people have described this as a counterculture movement because presidents who would often be striving for rankings or prestige, and often there was a move to be more exclusive. Instead, this group was trying to, actually open up a bit more and to take responsibility that when a student is admitted, that's a promise. And if they don't graduate, it's actually our fault. And so that was kind of the radical premise. One of the things for folks at home, what I would say is really the thing I aspire to and is the defining characteristic is that my presidents care as much about each other's students as they do their own. And the idea that that's radical, that's wild to me, right? But it is. And we do a lot of work around innovating together, trying to solve problems that they all share, scaling up what works. That's really where we spend a lot of our time because, it turns out most of the problems are the same. And it's really about translation, adaptation, evolving an idea, and how do you get it to spread? And then we're trying to do this as a public experiment to actually spread that this is possible and encourage other institutions to do this work. So that's why this week we announced we had set a very large public goal, graduate 68,000 additional graduates. And that was supposed to be in 10 years, and in only 6, we managed to graduate 73,000. And then we've increased our low income graduates by 36% and our graduates of color by 73%. So the fact that it's working means other people should probably try and work together, and that this is meaningful work, I think and then we also are expanding. So that's part of the other news.
Yeah, it really is incredible. I saw, you had an awesome video that was posted on LinkedIn earlier this week, kind of highlighting, how far you surpassed what were originally really ambitious goals, right? And so you've beaten those goals, you've beaten them earlier, which is pretty remarkable in the grand scheme of things, right? As higher ed continues to struggle around the equity and access agenda, there honestly haven't been a lot of highlights. Like I would have hoped that we would have seen a lot more highlights. And most of those highlights have come from the University Innovation Alliance. Obviously, it's member institutions. I'm curious about this, right? Like you made the point that they really are collaborative. We all used to go to conferences in person. We still have lots of virtual opportunities to convene. And a lot of the times, Bridget, it's like somebody gets up, they talk about the thing they're doing, and everybody else goes, oh, neat, but that's what so-and-so is doing. I'm going to go do it my own way, right? So although we share best practices a lot, that's a common thing in higher ed, we don't often adopt them in really sincere and serious ways, right? It's like, we got to do it our way, and we're different here, and we're going to do it, in a special, unique way. Like what? So it sounds like part of this has been the relationships of the presidents at the helm of this. Like, what are the other factors that are really, helping drive real collaboration, not just, let me tell you what I'm doing, right? And move about our day.
I think, so that's a great point you're making. And it is an issue that, we have this like culture where invented here is better than working. And that's the problem, is that people, one of the things that happened, and I want to I'll answer the question, that I think the answer is around our culture, and that we made it so that to get on stage, you had to share something from failure. And that's a very unusual thing, but we just saw there was just so much hype and PR, and like, we have this new center and we have this, and it just makes it so that people don't trust each other, they don't like each other, they don't feel like they have anything in common. It's just like a lot. I mean, what it's like to be marketed to, and it gets old, and it's not a means to diffuse ideas. So, I think that has been, that's a big impediment, but we focused on that, learning from failure, and trying to elevate and amplify those insights. But when I first got, I was in 2014 when we launched, but in 2013, I was an ACE fellow, following Michael Crow around. And I was trying to understand, who's the president of Arizona State. I was trying to learn about innovation and leadership and see if that was, if what people had said about ASU and about him, if it was true, or if it was just narrative. Right. And along the way, I found it was true, but also I went to more than 50 institutions, and I asked them each 2 questions, presidents and chancellors and provosts. And I said, what are you doing that you think that is really like innovative and different? And especially student success. And then what is someone else doing? And whenever people pitched me about the thing they were doing, it wasn't actually interesting. It was something I'd seen like 50 times before, 50 miles down the road, better somewhere else. Or what they were doing was not really working. And like, you just had to ask some very basic questions and be like, oh, this isn't really, I hope it feels good to spend that money. But then the other part was there was quite a bit of innovation where people didn't realize it was innovative. It was just like what they did. It was just their culture, the things that struck me. But the real problem was that I never found a single leader who had an answer to the second question. Nobody could say so-and-so down the road is doing this good. We don't have, I think part of it is the competitive nature of higher ed that makes us posture and preen, and like, we think that there's a scarcity of attention. And so it just makes it really difficult for people to want to team up and work together. But I would say that I think that we kind of force it, that you have to really show that you're someone who doesn't have it all figured out. And we've also really focused on this collective commitment to students. And I think at the end of the day, if you keep everyone very focused on the student, ignore the ranking, ignore the other, there's a lot of noise. That's been useful. But I think there's a variety of factors.
Yeah, I just remember, a couple of years ago when you and I were talking at one of the various conferences that we used to see each other at. One of the comments you made that has always stuck with me was the point you made about how these are leaders, and the University Innovation Alliance is an organization that has encouraged the sharing of failures, right? Like, what are we learning from failures? And you can't always, you don't want to talk about those things publicly, right? And not that these are super private, kinds of conversations. I mean, they're happening in, smaller group meetings, but like the point is they're willing to share failures and the insights, behind those failures. And that's not part of the common culture that's happened for all the reasons that, you just pointed out. One of the things that I think is also happening, and Kaplan, works closely with Purdue University, one of the members, and Arizona State University, and it's amazing to watch these institutions, not just Michael Crow's and the Mitch Daniels, but leaders and even the students across these organizations. They pride themselves on what you mentioned before, almost the opposite of how higher ed has defined itself in the elite. Hey, we're going to be as selective as possible, and that's how we kind of get ahead. Michael Crow has always said, we want to be defined by how many people we invite in, not how many people we exclude out. And to what degree do you think that that's actually becoming a popular and rewarded stance to take, right? So, like, for example, the criteria in U.S. News and World Report is not rewarding that in any obvious way just yet. But I'm starting to feel like the general public, prospective students, right? Like, these are institutions that have become, I mean, they've always been large and flagship institutions, but they're becoming as popular as ever in terms of interest and, visibility. Like, is there momentum there? Do you think there's real momentum around that as a new form of elite, is how many people we serve as opposed to how many people we turn away?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's really like a moral imperative that is, I wouldn't say it's gone viral, but it has over time won over. I mean, it's just a more compelling reason to do this work. I just think that the status of an individual institution, or that focus on exclusivity, its inherent message is you are not good enough. And if we look at what's happening in this country, we need more people to believe that they are good enough for college. And also we need them to aspire to, critical thinking and to learning and to knowledge and discovery and all of these things. So I think that it's a higher purpose that has really ignited a lot of presidents. I'm surprised now where, I think when I first was getting started out in this work, President Crow's message was very much ASU only. And that's actually where the Alliance was first born, is that there was a report written by New America, and it was the Next Generation Universities report. And it was basically the first time that he discovered other presidents believed the same things. They believed that you could be big and good, and that really focusing on the needs of our country and serving more people, that was an admirable goal. And discovered Georgia State, discovered University of California, Riverside, University of Central Florida. So that led to these institutions for the first time realize, oh, I'm not alone. And then they later on have a conversation where they invite a few other presidents to lead to the Alliance. So, the fact that was a 2012 report and they didn't know that each other existed, to now where student success is actually, it's a sexy thing. That's part of what we've been trying to do, is make it something that's as important as any of these other values that we, some of them are toxic values, but we wanted to make sure that this was something that was validated, and it was really, I think, aligning with that moral imperative. So I see it now, and I frequently will have conversations with presidents, and they will bring it up as if it's their own idea. And I'm like, man, this is exactly what he wanted. This is exactly the goal, right? To make it so that people think it was their idea. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely spreading, not fast enough.
Yeah. And so tell me about some of the impact, right? Obviously, the institutions that are members of the Innovation Alliance have made some incredible headway. What reverberation and positive impact are you seeing across higher ed more broadly, or other institutions? I'm sure you've got a number of examples, but I'm just curious to have you highlight some of those ripple effects that you're seeing?
I think probably the first one is that I think people know what interventions are worth their time. That's been one of our objectives through our diffusion strategy, is that, higher ed student success can often feel like alchemy. It's really difficult to fix. It's not arrow up, arrow over, arrow down. And so, as much of the Alliance's work has really been about validating other ideas from other places. So predictive analytics, proactive advising, completion grants, college to career transformation, chatbots, all of these things that are not Alliance ideas. They are, from Georgia State, from other places. This did is, okay, these innovative campuses tested these ideas. Turns out it does work. It's worth your time. And what presidents needed to know was, if I don't have much time, much money, much energy, what do I spend my time and energy on? So that's been important. And then I think, beyond that, the actual change on the campuses has been pretty profound, which I mentioned earlier in terms of the dramatic increases. And I would say I can't, and I feel like it's important to say, I can't tell you any one of our projects led to that, because I don't actually know that's the thing. I think there's something, I often describe our work as like a Weight Watchers group for universities to be good at something they've never been good at. And I think there's something there about collaboration as a vehicle to drive ambitious work that is really transformative. And there's something about, they have skin in the game, the consistent annual accountability, like we weigh them in on their data annually, et cetera. So I would say the institutional change itself, and that I can't take any credit for that. But the last piece is that there's a lot more collaboration and a lot more focus and talk about student success. Student success is sexy, collaboration as sexy as we could make it. And most of that was about getting people to change their understanding of collaboration, because everyone's been a part of a bad collaborative.
Right.
And there's also like forced collaboratives and like systems and stuff. So, there've been more than 20 other networks that have formed to try and replicate this model. And I think just the drumbeat around student success. So those are the things I would say are in the field ways that you would know we've made a dent, but we still have so much further to go.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible. I mean, just take the numbers. I think you said it's a net 72,000 graduates above what the run rate was before the initiative, right? That's the net increase of graduates out of the institutions.
It's above. So at the time, it's above that run rate plus above their goals they had previously set. It's a stretch goal that was on top of that. And it was part of the White House College Opportunity Summit in 2014, that in order to get into those doors, you had to commit to something really big and bold. And we know it was big and bold because the White House actually questioned whether or not our numbers were real or we just made them up. And I remember at the time being so like annoyed, because I'm like, what do you think? I'm just going to make this, like, why would I pick 68,000? But thankfully they did. And so we go back to the IR teams, we validate it, prove it out. And then in the end, turns out we blew it out of the water. So it was an ambitious goal. And now it turns out we could have been more ambitious.
Yeah. I mean, look, to put it in perspective, right? That's a big number, however you count it, right? You put in perspective, the entire Ivy League graduated about 13,000 students this year, right? The entire Ivy League. Now, the Ivy League probably dominates, some significant percentage of the news, the stories, the thought, landscape within higher ed. And yet, in a time when equity and access are as important and imperative for economic competitiveness, right? When you think about where employers are trying to go, like they're doing a miserable job on equity and access. It just, it puts those numbers into perspective. 11 institutions creating a net, gain of 72,000 graduates in a period of these years. Like, obviously it's working. What insights do you think have come from these large publics that apply directly to the small private liberal arts institutions right now? Like, are there any really specific ones that you think apply there?
Well, I think some of the learnings around what are the impediments to change are universal. So that there's not a person in charge of student success. People often say, well, we have a president and provost for that. No, who's going to get fired if you don't actually improve? Like, if you can't answer that question, then you haven't done the work, because at the end of the day, this is a real murky, hard thing to figure out. And if, I think making sure you actually have a champion internally that has a large enough portfolio that they can actually drive change. That's pretty important, because otherwise what we find is that's the real like time suck in this work is people who spend most of their time as mid-level administrators trying to convince people at the same level that we should do this or that. And they just, it's meetings upon meetings upon, they never go anywhere because these people don't report to them. They don't have to do it, disagree with you. So I think there's some change stuff, specifically also around new ideas needing actual support. We have our fellows program, which I think is really, shows that there is an energy. There's a whole generation of people who are superstars that want to work in higher ed, but they don't want to be faculty. They don't want to do research. They maybe be a president, but they really want to work on change that's personally connected to their mission. So that's another. But I would say any small liberal arts college should also focus on their analytics using all these interventions. And I think probably the most important is that if you lose a low income, a first generation, or a student of color, if they drop out, that is not an outlier. That is actually how you should refocus all of your work to unpack why and how and redesign the institution around them being successful. And if you do that, it actually will make it easier for all students, whether they have that background or not. That's something we know because the students we're talking about, the vulnerable students, the reasons they drop out are often bureaucracy, poor communication, financial loophole, like all the messy stuff that you need to fix anyway. So follow when you see something like that, when you see something go wrong for a vulnerable student, like you should actually see them as the leading indicator.
Yeah, that's incredible advice. I mean, I don't know that I've thought about it that way. I think that makes perfect sense, right? That's a great rallying call for, yes, you want to fix it for them, right? But in doing so, it fixes what you should have fixed in general anyhow, right? There's too much friction involved in, all of the transactions related to higher ed. And, it's usually those little, seemingly innocent student support services that, sit around all the edges that make all the difference. I mean, I remember, doing research projects when I was at Gallup on full scholarships for students from underserved communities. I mean, these were full ride, right? Tuition, room, board, and they were still having a high percentage of students drop out. And one of the crushing insights was that a lot of these students who were first-gen students, right? They were also the oldest in their family. They had been relied upon by their family to literally help put food on the table for younger, siblings or other family members. And even though they had all their costs of college paid for, it was the lost income. And the difference was about $500 a month that got them, that pulled them back out of higher ed, back to the responsibilities and duties they felt at home. And so you sit back and you go, oh my gosh, that was, if we could help them send $500 home, that was the difference between dropping out and not, right? So these examples stick in my head. And I love how you framed that in terms of advice for everybody, including the small private liberal arts institutions. The other thing you said, that I think resonates a lot is like thinking about the change agents, right? Who actually owns this work on a college campus? And on previous sessions I've had, we've talked a little bit about innovation in higher education. And one of the things I've always said is the institutions that are really making a lot of progress on this, like they have people who are titled vice president of innovation, or right, like they've named it. There's somebody who, whose job is being measured by that. And, the president is obviously kind of supportive of it, but it's somebody that's on their executive team and, tasked with, growth or innovation or whatever it is. So I think that's, that change management and organizational structure piece is a really important one that I think people don't spend a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah, like Tim Rennick's title before he transitioned to his new role at the National Institute was Senior Vice President for Student Success. And that title didn't exist anywhere that I knew of. And it really reflects, he had like 1,000+ people reporting to him. And that's what you need if you're going to try and actually do big systemic transformative change. You need to be able to say financial aid, you're going to do this, advising, you're going to do this. Like you need to not have to spend all your time negotiating with them and trying to like convince them to move in it, because we don't have that kind of time. And so, I think that's been something that's been profound for me, is recognizing that this negotiating with people at the same level, just what a time suck it is. And it really is holding us back. But it's interesting. So you and I probably disagree about the innovation thing. I find that Centers for Innovation, VP for Innovation, um, I I'm not sold on those yet, because I feel like they send a message that this is where the innovation happens and this person's in charge of innovation, when I feel like everyone is capable of innovation. And it's really about setting about the conditions in which that they can be innovative. And what I've found weighs people down the most is overburdened plates, terrible meetings, and org charts that make no sense, that they spend most of their time doing just work that is really not, it's not optimized. And that there isn't, like I always ask, like, what is the last really new idea that came on your campus and where'd it come from? And people don't talk and think about those things, but I'm like, if it's that Cindy went to that one conference, then send her to that conference again and send other people, or if it's that one time we finally had an offsite where we did just a brainstorm session, fine, then let's do more of that. Right. And then also, like, people actually talking about things that didn't go right. That is where I find is a better source of innovation, is that, most places don't have those cultures. You don't talk about it. There's many $1 million failures that have just sat around and we hide it under the carpet. But you look for those kind of types of conversations and like cultural values. And I think those are a better indication than, I've seen a lot of VPs for innovation, which many of them are my friends. I'm like, great, awesome. But I think sometimes I sense when I go on a campus, this kind of resentment of that person is apparently the innovator. So what does that mean about me? And so I think of it as an opportunity that campuses can enroll people in the experience of change and innovation by, creating the conditions, rather than, this person over here is going to be the innovator and the rest of you are just like going to do the work. So that's why our fellows program they actually come in and they're kind of like, it's like inserting chiefs of staff under really important, overburdened people. What we notice is like the light bulb effect of like, oh my gosh, I can actually like do my job now because I have this person helping me. Right. So yeah, I think that's a space where I'm looking forward to, like 10 years in, we'll know, how do we staff this? Because I think there's a lot of experiments happening right now and I'm still watching.
Yeah, the ones I've been thinking of, they've done a great job. Like they have those established roles. Some of them have even innovation committees on their boards of trustees, which is a really, interesting way to do it. But they've all been doing a really good job of what you suggested, which is it's not like I own this and all innovation sits here. It's that they've really created a lot of cross collaboration and threads and encouragement and, breaking down silos. And so, I'm sure the jury is still out in terms of the best models. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about before we wrap is, you think of the success of the University Innovation Alliance, right? Major, large public universities who collaborate in real ways. To what degree shouldn't we see something like that among large employers, right? Like a closed employer network of non-competitive employers who share resumes of candidates that might not be a fit for them, but instead of having the person apply to another company, it's automatically, passed along where there might be a better fit, or, they're collaborating on diversity and training initiatives. Like, have you had interactions with employers that have taken notice of the work you're doing and seeing any signal strength for employers to do this same kind of thing?
So we did launch a national employer working group to help us with our college to career work to try and reimagine that handoff. And we're going to release a playbook for that in about a month. But I don't think it's the same. I think it was it created a space for them to talk about their shared problems. And so my answer would be, after all this work, after 8 years in this, and prior to this, I was a chief of staff for a university system. I think there are only 2 reasons to form an alliance, and it's shared problem and big goal that we can only accomplish together. And I think any other reason, don't do it. But it sounds like if they have that shared problem around resumes and about like hiring, and yes, then make sure you're narrowly focused on that's the act, and you set a goal. Everyone has to come in and actually be committed to that. But that's where you set up the candor around transparency, around failure, learning, sharing, all that kind of stuff. And then the big goal that you're going to move towards. But yeah, I think that as long as they have the same problems, which I find, it doesn't really matter what kind of organization, they're all pretty much the same. Change problems are the same. And we like to slap the word innovation on because it makes us feel like it's exciting and it sounds better, but it's like, at the end of the day, innovation just means change. And sometimes innovation can be just like getting rid of a terrible meeting so that people can do the work, right? Like, so, defining what it means, I think is probably my suggestion.
Well, I hear you advocating to change your name to the University Change Alliance in there. So maybe we'll get, a new backdrop the next time we talk. But in all seriousness, Bridget, it's great to talk to you. Congratulations to, first to the Alliance, but in particular, your leadership. I know you're always, quiet about taking any credit yourself, but the work you've done here is incredible. I consider you one of my favorite bold leaders in learning, and I'm really grateful that you came on the show today. So thank you so much, and to all of our folks that joined us today, we'll look forward to catching you next Thursday.
Thanks for having me.